Hello, I'm Ade Daramy and welcome to another Insolvency Service podcast. In this edition, we look at director disqualification. And here to talk with us is Gareth Allen, Intelligence and Enforcement Lead at the Insolvency Service.
Morning, Eddie.
Hi, Gareth. Now, disqualification is a key output for the Insolvency Service, but can you give us an overview of what it's about exactly?
Okay. Disqualification stops people being directors or being involved in the promotion, formation or management of a company without permission from the court. If they contravene such a disqualification, they can be subject to a criminal sanction. Saying that, disqualification itself is only aimed at the very few. The vast majority of directors in this country who discharge their duties ably and professionally have nothing to be concerned about. What we do is seek to remove those who show themselves to be unfit from directorship. We try to increase the faith in the quality of directors that we have in this country. It hopefully encourages higher standard of corporate behaviour across the piece and increases some confidence in the marketplace to maintain the UK's position as a great place to do business.
That sounds very impressive, but how does the legislation actually operate in practice?
Well, the Act itself identifies areas where people can be disqualified. It ranges from things like the automatic disqualification for where people are made bankrupt, to those disqualifications that happen following someone being convicted of a crime in connection with a company. Section 6, which is what we deal with in the main in the Insolvency Service, deals with a director's fitness to be a director again following an insolvency event. In order to get involved in that part of the business or to use those powers, we need to prove three things. One is that the individual was a director, the next was that the company became insolvent, and finally that the conduct of that director was unfit. Now that conduct itself is specific to the individual director, so we have to consider the facts with regard to each one. But once a finding of unfitness is made by the court, then the court has no ability to make anything other than a disqualification order. It has to disqualify. We also have the opportunity to accept disqualification undertakings, and they operate in the same way as a disqualification order. Under Section 6, a person can be disqualified from anywhere between 2 and 15 years.
Okay, now you've mentioned Section 6 a couple of times there, and you said that the Insolvency Service deals in the main with Section 6 disqualifications. How are these cases chosen for investigation?
The vast majority of insolvencies in the corporate arena in the UK are not cases that are wound up by the court. They are dealt with by insolvency practitioners. And those insolvency practitioners have to provide a report to us at the 6-month stage following their appointment. In that report, they provide facts about the case, and they also identify those cases where they believe there are matters that we should consider where they think there has been unfitness on the part of the directors. Those reports, when we receive them, are reviewed by us to see whether there is any evidence to support the suggested case. We also bring in any other information that we currently hold within the Insolvency Service, and we have to weigh whether it would be in the public interest to pursue that matter. In cases that are wound up by the court, that are dealt with by another part of the Insolvency Service, the Official Receiver's Office, they make that consideration themselves, but follow the same steps.
Okay. Now, what types of cases do you seek to take forward, and what type of period of disqualification do they attract?
Okay. Well, the Insolvency Service, as I've said, is part of the Business Innovation and Skills family, so we need to ensure that the UK remains to be a great place to do business. And on top of that, being the Insolvency Service, we need to make sure that the insolvency regimes themselves are made. So what we do is we seek to take action in areas where we think we will support those overarching aims. So we look at things like the promotion of fair competition as a broad area. And so, for example, we'll take action where someone gets an unfair advantage by failing to pay tax, thereby putting them in a better position in comparison to their competitors because they do not have that expense to pay. We seek to promote fair treatment of creditors and customers. Directors who know what is happening within a business have the ability to choose who to pay, including themselves, which in an insolvency situation creates an unfairness. For example, 2 directors were disqualified earlier this year for a total of 29 years in a case where they had mishandled over £7 million worth of investment funds. We look to promote structures for viable and sustainable businesses. For an effective economy, creditors and the wider business community should expect a company to maintain accounting records which will enable the directors to make effective decisions about what they are doing with the company, and for the company, when called upon, to be able to explain how it's traded. So, for example, in January this year, we disqualified somebody for 8 years, where by their failure to deliver up accounting records to the office holder, we were unable to see and verify how £12.1 million worth of expenditure from the bank account was actually used and whether it was for the benefit of the company. We also look to promote transparency of business ownership, to make sure that creditors know who they are dealing with and can have some confidence with that. And on the enforcement and insolvency regimes, we look to make sure that they're not abused. So we do take action against those that act in contravention of disqualification orders, and we also act against those that allow people to act in contravention of disqualification orders.
That's great. Now, you've given us an example of the types of cases you take forward and also some examples of those cases. But how does the investigation process itself work?
Well, once cases are accepted for investigations, the investigators plan and identify key inquiries that they need to make. Throughout that process, they have to keep an open mind about the facts and information that they find, and they have to weigh that evidence at all times to see whether it would be sufficient to make a finding of unfitness. That would usually involve, in most cases, a visit to the insolvency practitioner to review both the insolvency practitioner's records to see whether there has been cooperation from the director and any other information about director engagement, but also, and in the main, to have a look at the accounting records of the company. And the accounting records of the company are extremely important for the investigation. They're a contemporaneous record of what happened within the company, and it also says what information was available to, or should have been available to, the directors to make the decisions as they were going through. We also have to have in mind the engagement with the directors. We need to talk to those directors because they were there at the time. We have the benefit from the insolvency position of seeing what happened as a result of directors' decisions, but they were making those decisions in a specific context, and we have to give consideration to that.
Okay, so you contact the directors for their side of the story and to put their actions in context. Following on from that, how do you keep the investigation process under review?
Well, we do need to think about context constantly. What could the directors have done? Should they have done differently at that point in time? And so we do avoid using hindsight. So we review the available evidence to see whether it is sufficient to support a finding of unfitness. And then we also apply a public interest test as well to see whether there is a public interest in pursuing those cases going forward.
Now, you mentioned the public interest. How do you define the public interest in disqualification cases?
Well, the key points of public interest for us in any action that we take within the insolvency service in disqualification is to make sure that we are acting as a deterrent to others who might be considering similar action, and also to deter the director who has done that action from doing it again. Thereby, we're trying to improve the corporate behaviour across the piece. By doing so, we also will then advertise and or publicise the fact that those disqualifications have taken place. We'll seek to protect the public by taking disqualification action, by taking those people that are putting their actions beyond the pale of what we would consider to be fit. And we also need to make sure that our action is both fair and just to the individual.
Okay. So how do you guard against the desire to see all investigations through to disqualification, given the time and resources that the insolvency service has?
Well, we have professional investigators who are motivated to do the right thing. They always consider the evidence that's against any director at that point in time. They consider that both the pros and the cons, and they also bear in mind the public interest in proceeding against an individual. On top of that, we have an authorisation procedure where someone else looks over the result of an investigation and makes a separate decision about whether we should take further action. And that's in line with the Phillips principle, which states that there should be a separation of investigative and enforcement functions.
Okay. Now, for a director who's facing disqualification proceedings, this must be quite expensive to defend. How do you ensure fairness for defendants?
It's always going to be a difficulty to have some equality between the state and individual defendants. We are not motivated by taking action to stop taking action because of the cost that would be involved, but it is true that defendants do not have the same resources as us. I've already mentioned that we have an authorisation process that independently reviews those investigation cases. We also have a defendants liaison team who issue letters prior to action taking place, which enables directors to put forward their point of view. And that defendant liaison team ensure that defendants are fully aware of the case against them so that they can make appropriate decisions as to how they want to proceed. What we do not do, and we do not coerce defendants into giving us undertakings. We are interested in making sure that we are making the right decisions and taking the right action. We listen to the point of view of any defendant that has anything to say to us, and we consider the evidence that's put before us and the public interest throughout. In certain circumstances, we have withdrawn cases and we have not gone any further forward with them. Very rarely as well, we do lose cases at court, and where we do, we consider what lessons we ought to learn from those cases and put that back into our overall investigation and enforcement process.
Thank you. Now, how many disqualifications a year do you seek to achieve?
Well, we do not have a target for disqualifications within the Insolvency Service. What we do is pursue all cases which meet our evidential criteria and our public interest criteria. In 2013-14, there are 1,211 disqualifications under Section 6 and Section 8. And we also provided substantial assistance in 62 disqualifications that were achieved following a criminal conviction. I would just point out that we're not a prosecuting authority ourselves, but we have provided that assistance to ensure that disqualifications will have taken place. In this year, I'm confident that 2014-15 will see similar numbers of disqualifications achieved. And I would just like to finish just to say that each disqualification has a net benefit of around £100,000 a year to the market in terms of financial harm those directors would otherwise have caused.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Gareth Allen, Intelligence and Enforcement Lead at the Insolvency Service, for telling us about director disqualification.
Thanks, Ali.
And thank you for listening to this podcast, and you can catch up and keep up with Insolvency Service work via Twitter, and our Twitter handle is @InsolvencyGovUK. Once again, thanks for listening.